introducing yourself and then tell us about your organization baseline protocol.
John, why don't you let me go first, and then
go ahead,
you can
Nick.
roll right in. And so I'm Nick Kritikos. Yeah, exactly. I'm Nick Kritikos with Consensus for about 4 years. Big fan of Lori Kehoe, one of the co-founders of your organization. Before coming to Consensus, I was at Microsoft for 3 years, running the Microsoft Technology Centers in the US. And prior to that, I was at Oracle for 18 years, where we used to centralize everything and had the world's greatest database. You can't diss the Oracle database. And now I'm in the decentralized space trying to fix that. So I'm here today with John Wolpert. John, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Nick. I've been in the business over 30 years, goodness gracious. And was a big fan of relational databases back in the 80s when I was at Cal, and knew I think you're right, you can't diss Oracle. In fact, that was the worst part of my existence when I was at IBM for the 3 tours of IBM back in the 90s and then in the 2000s, and then as recently as 2013. I was an IBMer. I started with Jerry Cuomo and a bunch of other folks, the IBM blockchain stuff, Hyperledger Fabric. And this is a true story. Hyperledger was conceived in a boozy lunch with one of the executives from LSEG, London Stock Exchange Group, where it wasn't too boozy. I think we had one drink and we were like, so we should start a foundation. And then I think it was Chris Ferris that convinced us to use Linux Foundation, and things went from there. And then I wrote a check for $500,000, and then Hyperledger happened. So yeah, I was involved with Hyperledger. The original thought behind Hyperledger was, hey, when we're trying to form consortia, we all need to say that we have control without anyone being in control of the system through which we do business. I wrote that line, if you've heard it before. I also think I wrote the line for Jerry that he uses a lot, no chain, one chain will rule them all. Both of those lines are wrong, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. And I can own that because I wrote them. There needs to be, in distributed systems 101, if you want multiple machines, 2 or more, to coordinate in any real way, you need a common frame of reference. You need a machine playing traffic cop. You can either primary one of those machines, or you can set up a new integration bus. We all know the business, right? You need timing, or more importantly, you need this before that, and you need verification of consistency. And you can use MQ, you can use all sorts of things for that, but you need some common frame of reference. If you don't want balkanization, at some point, you need one chain to serve them all. It's a very low level, boring job, right? Basically hash management and ordering. But you do want one thing, and preferably something that's always on, supremely tamper resistant, and can't lock you out of valid operations by getting controlled by somebody that doesn't like you. And that is my definition of decentralization. I never use the term, try never to use the term decentralized to justify something tautologically. Oh, it's good because it's decentralized. What does that mean? I hear it all the time. I'm getting, at 55, I'm getting cantankerous and ornery about things like this, right? Right now I'm cantankerous and ornery about NFT hype and the word tokenization. Never want to hear any of those words ever again. I respect all of the stuff behind it that is valid, but I think as often happens, you get groupthink going, and people are like, oh, let's NFT this and let's NFT that, or let's and isn't it odd that like all the arguments that we were making verbatim for blockchain to begin with are now being re-rolled out, but instead of saying blockchain, they say NFT. I'm like, what happened here? What's happening? We debunked why all those things weren't good blockchain cases. Why are you resurrecting them now? All right, so that's been my experience. I was at IBM Watson for a number of years, and then I was for some period, and then came back, and Jerry Cuomo called me one day and said, hey, there's this thing called blockchain. Let's go find out what's going on, and went from there. In 2017, along with Nick Kritikos, I joined Joe Lubin at Consensus, and have never looked back. The reason I left was that I started and joined Joe is that I was always a little nervous about what we called Andreessen's revenge. Mark Andreessen was making fun of us back in 2015 for creating private blockchains. And we were like, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't appreciate what we're doing. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, Mark is smarter than me. He must know something. And he did. A private blockchain technology in general is a digital nudist colony. That's the best way I can explain it. It is a pattern that does not like compartmentalization. Oracle learned long ago, 40 years ago, compartmentalization is fundamental to database technology. You need to be able to have access controls. Party A can see table 1, party B can see table 2. Party C can see record N in table 2. You need to be able to control those things. Blockchains don't like to do that, public or private. A private blockchain is like a nudist colony on a private beach. If you have access to the beach, if you have a node, you may not have access to unencrypted data, but come on, in the age of AI especially, I can learn a lot just by having that node. In fact, one of my favorite stories is we were talking to a company that was very proud of their private blockchain, and they had a bunch of banks. And I said, well, so where's the blockchain? Who's running the nodes? And they said, well, we are. They're all in our server farm. And I said, oh, well, do any of the banks want their own node? And they said, well, yes, they all do. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, the problem is none of them want any of the other banks to have one. You see the problem. So a shared database of information that you're very happy that the dumbest administrator in your network is going to get hacked and out you all on is okay. But I'm really worried about private blockchains, right? At what point does the news break that somebody with a node got hacked? Right. So I think a lot of pointy-eared managers, as it were, think that blockchain technology is somehow a magical high security database. It's not, right? It's more tamper resistant than a privately administrated single company Oracle database, traditional. But that privately traditional air-gapped, well-administrated Oracle database is really good at compartmentalization, at surveillance resistance. Your private blockchain is not very good at it. Public blockchains, of course, are terrible at it. By definition, everything on them is public. So, I used to work for a company called Strategos many years ago, and we had the saying, but that's a dumb idea, but that won't work, but it would if. And that's the mental model that we went through with over the last few years to say, well, but blockchain isn't very good at being a database. Not if we're going to use it to store any kind of data that we are worried about getting breached. But it would be a good piece of middleware. Especially a public blockchain is extremely good at tamper resistance. It's hard to tamper with it, and it's hard to get control of it. It's probably the most hard to get control of thing that we have in computer science today, right? Would we all agree with that?
Yes, it would.
Yep.
Yeah. But it's really the worst at keeping secrets, right?
Yeah.
In fact, you have to think that maybe the whole thing was invented by the NSA to catch stupid criminals who think that they're being anonymous, right? Give me a good machine learning system and a little time, and I'll make you in 7 transactions. Right?
Well, Dread Pirate Roberts, right? There you go.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, that's a perfect example. When was that? 2013? 7-8 years ago?
Was it 2013? I thought it was before 2015. That's for sure.
So okay, that was very manual back then, and chain analysis and other tools came out of that. But to your point, right? And everyone thought at the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, no, it can't be cracked. But that agent, and I can't pronounce his surname, Jared something or other, was just persistent. And
Han, what was her first name? Catherine Hahn. Yeah, she made her whole name on that bust, right? And so that was a big deal. But then, yeah, more recently, just talk about NFTs. My team did a little NFT project a couple of years ago. We launched it at South by Southwest, and we just had a few whale friends buy this NFT and trade it around. It's called Bootleg. If you look it up, Bootleg, the shared royalty on non-fungible token, which, by the way, is kind of an interesting approach to NFTs. It basically says you and I, we can, everybody who's ever owned it gets a piece of whatever it gets sold to the next person for. You create this chain where everybody has a reason not to give away the file because you'd be destroying your own future cash flows. Kind of a cool approach.
Yeah.
So we put this up and we traded around with some whales just to demonstrate it. Well, I know who those are. And years later, in fact, 2 weeks ago, we went back and looked at that contract, and I'm sitting there looking straight at the accounts of these people. And I know who they are. And I know right now what's in those accounts. And they may have other accounts, but it seems very uncomfortable for me to know what's in their accounts. So think about that from a corporate perspective, right? Is that, do you really want to be NFTing your supply chain? Do you want your pallets and your SKUs to be NFT'd? You definitely want good data hygiene. You definitely want to do good digitization, and you definitely want better collaboration than we have today or have had. But do you really want to put these discrete items on any kind of blockchain? I say no. So again, it doesn't work, dumb idea, but it wouldn't be if, and that's where I'll share screen. We'll talk about baseline protocol. Any questions while I'm doing that?
Nope.
I'm sorry for anybody who's, this is a fairly provocative statement. And again, I can only say I'm only calling my own baby ugly. I did build the thing. But there's a bright light at the end of that tunnel. Oops. So can everybody see the screen at this point?
Yeah, we can see it.
So I'm not going to talk about blockchain anymore. I'm going to talk about verified multi-party workflows, because that's really where it's at. What the problem, blockchains is a piece of technology. We need to talk about the problem that's at hand. The problem at hand is you could spend $1 billion. In fact, when I was at Best Buy, I think we spent $1 billion on systems of record, ERP systems, e-commerce systems. And the best they could do is tell us what we thought we knew about our business partner relationships and our transactions with them. It didn't tell us anything about what was actually being recorded and believed on the other side of any of those relationships. You send me an invoice, I've turned that into a bill. My billing system and my payable system is a piece of information, which was hand typed from the email, and somebody fat fingered an extra zero, or we didn't get the email, or somebody missed it. We didn't get the memo. In that counterparty's invoice system is an invoice. In my system, there isn't an invoice, or it's a different set of data. We are inconsistent. This is not a good thing.
Even today, Steve Cox, one of Oracle's leaders on business process and their applications, talks about when they're doing a financial close, even with a great ERP system like Oracle, you're still doing a lot of chasing and waiting. And that extends the period of time on the financial close. If you didn't have to chase and wait, your financial close could happen in 3 days or 5 days even. Anyway, sorry.
Whenever you have multiple parties, according to a study by IDC in 2019, 33% of these events contain errors. I think that's, even if it's 10%, it's a crazy number. 50 cents it costs just to track them down on average, just mostly in manual effort. And 30% of these, even the largest firms, share records manually via email, fax, PDF, what have you, maybe a DocuSign. And these are big numbers. And this is not including what happens when Best Buy calls the supplier and says, hey, your stuff isn't on our dock to put on the shelves, and it was due here today. And the supplier says, well, my records say that it's due here in 2 weeks. And Best Buy says, I don't care what your record says. You will do whatever it takes and spend whatever money you need to to get it here tomorrow, or you don't have to do business with us anymore. We've got an ad campaign now. We've got end caps to do, et cetera, right? That's a $10 million hit possibly, right? In expediting an order that, or not at all, right? You're going to lose business because you don't have the order ready, right? So data errors are crazy. In fact, I've got a journalist friend. I was like, let's go look at what the havoc wreaked upon the Suez Canal incident recently on data consistency up and down the supply chain. Just nothing else but data consistency. What got inconsistent during that event? I bet it's a lot. So data consistency is a problem, and that's what we're really going to talk about. And it's something that blockchains really can address. So yeah, actually, Nick, I don't really understand this slide. You want to talk about it? This is the new slide deck.
Yeah, generally when you're working with large network partnerships, we've gone from a period of vertical integration to outsourcing to now networks of relationships. There are many things to manage, right? Things like total volume purchase, aggregate spend, all of these inputs in the process. Keep going, John.
Yeah.
And oftentimes today, these are tackled through a data as exchange as a service, right? A central entity like an Ariba or a portal that all of the participants share information and ultimately turn this portal into a honeypot or into really a rent-seeking adversary in some cases.
Also, it doesn't solve the problem of consistency. If you're typing into their portal, you can get it wrong, and then you can go and change your data on your side, even if you use the API and you're fairly confident that the API ran the join correctly and the data that at that moment was consistent, but then you go and change it later. Now you're inconsistent. You don't know it. You don't know, and there's no way to really at that point have non-repudiation. You have no way of knowing who was right later on, not without major investigation and forensic analysis.
And you become beholden to this central entity. So if they want to raise their prices, or heaven forbid they go out of business, then you could lose a lot of this capability as well.
Right. So the evolution of this is we started thinking of blockchain really as a single
shared
source
database
of truth, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I'll just jump forward. I think this is, did our designer,
TJ turned one slide into three.
Got it. So effectively what we've done is we started with in 2015, and this was my thinking, that we need a single source of truth, right? This is the Walmart thing. This is the Maersk trade lens thing, that we need one shared system, one shared database to contain our shared information so that we eliminate that problem of consistency. And it is one pattern for eliminating the problem, right? Like we all have this one database. We all share a node. We all feel like we have control. Oh, it took us 18 extra months to get there because none of us understood the technology, and there was all this governance stuff on top of it, on top of the fact that forming consortia is hard and always will be, right? Politics. You didn't get rid of the hegemon. You still needed the Walmart to make everybody do it. You still needed the Maersk to make everybody do it. And then still people grumble about the fact that it's really Walmart or Maersk, right? So these things didn't get solved with the magic blockchain. But they might get solved with the magic bus. That's why I got a magic bus up behind me. So again, baseline is going to be about changing from blockchain as database to blockchain as middleware. It's the magic bus. So single source of truth is one way to go, not the right way to go. And then we got into sort of thinking of it as back-end compute, right? The world computer. And this is one thing that Vitalik Buterin said, and I've said to him to his face, I said, the one thing I don't think that you said that I didn't agree with was that it's the world computer. I think that Vitalik has a pretty nuanced idea of what that means, but most people took him at his word. And Come on, you can't have a singleton that will handle all the reads and writes of everybody's backend. You know, it's just not going to happen. The laws of physics prevent it. Never say never, but never. Is that going to be a thing? Quantum computing isn't going to solve that. The reads and writes cost time in compute. And you can't, even a supremely sharded Cassandra database without any data consistency or without any consensus algorithm to deal with is still not going to handle the reads and writes of everybody's backend, not efficiently. So don't use it for that, right? Use a database for your backend. It's a good thing to use. They're good. Oracle has a really good one.
Row level locking.
Yeah, row level locking. That was a major innovation. It's amazing how people forget about the cool stuff that happened before. Got to teach the millennials about row level locking, Nick. So if you're not going to use it as back end, right, it can be, however, an effective and performant enough. I used to run performant, all the ilities for a company. That was my job. Reliability, maintainability, scalability, all those ilities. And when you do the math on a public blockchain like Ethereum, it is performant and scalable enough to handle 10 billion B2B work steps a day with a little bit of fancy batching. And as long as you don't put that at the coalface of the actual application, but rather at the interface between different systems of record. Or, I'm using NetSuite, Nick is using SAP, and we need to know that my record in my database and your record in your database are verifiably identical. The speed at which I need to know that in business is usually slow enough that you don't have, it's not like a Twitch game, where you have to have that instantaneously. Finality is no longer an issue. And you can get these through. They don't have to happen immediately. So you can also, the cost of it goes down. So the back end to back ends, the consistency engine, and what we'll call the common frame of reference, right? So we've gone from single source of truth to the notion of common frame of reference. I have a database. I've got NetSuite. You've got JD Edwards. Somebody else has got SAP or Microsoft Dynamics, or somebody else has got an Excel spreadsheet or QuickBooks. All these systems of record in a baseline world become, once again, the core, the important thing. I've got my database, you've got your database. I'm not primarying yours, you're not primarying mine. We don't have hegemony issues, but we're using this bulletin board out here, this always on public bulletin board. And by the way, we can start with a private one, but doing it this way, the baseline way, means you can also just flick a switch and go public whenever you like. You haven't put any data on the thing that would become exposed, which, by the way, your CISO is going to love. Right? Half of this work is about making sure that the CISO, we call them Celia and Cecil the CISO, that the security officer would actually go from hating blockchain, which, by the way, they all do for good reason. I've never met one that liked it. Big giant threat surfaces are not something that CISOs like. To something that they're quite comfortable with. They're like, oh yeah, you're putting hashes on a bulletin board? Great, do it. No problem at all. I've been saying a lot of stuff right now, so I'm going to pause. What questions do you guys have? What challenges?
Do you want me to pick on somebody?
Yeah. Ian, did you think I was going to do an ad for Oracle, traditional Oracle databases on this call?
Well, you're pushing it hard, right? Thanks very much.
Hey. It beat DB2 solidly. I mean, and that was my team, so good for you guys.
Yeah. Patrick, any of this resonating with you, or is because I know you're in supply chain. I know you've had issues with your carbon, not your carbon taxes. That was somebody else. What is you as well? Carbon taxes. I'm putting you on the spot here, Patrick, or do you want us just to move on?
No, you're good. I mean, the issues that you talked about, I think we hit up against the same problems that you mentioned with the forming consortia and trying to establish governance logic, and the same idea of having, basically it's a fancy database where you've agreed the, maybe agreed smart contracts, you've agreed the business logic, you agree the hierarchy, and finally you come up against the lawyers and the security officers in these enterprises, and it ends there.
Yeah.
So
now, if you can get that far,
familiar.
Right. If you can get that far, in fact, that's what I was talking about with my friend who's running the thing at IBM last night. If you can get that far, there's nothing wrong with that. Honestly, I think that blockchain prompted a lot of companies, and correctly so, to prioritize working together more, because that's where it's at, right? It's no longer about us building this giant ERP system or this big system integration internally. It's about having integrations across companies. We need that, right? And in fact, I think it's going to drive a lot of the data hygiene work that we've always, for 30 years, we've needed to do and just didn't prioritize, because let's be honest, the house is never so clean as when you have neighbors over, right? So the cross-company multi-party workflow integrations, I think, will drive a lot of internal integration hygiene over time. I think it prioritizes it way more than this, some new CIO coming in and saying, we've got to get our data hygiene together. And then people sort of say yes for a while, and then it kind of drops off the radar. I think that when you're integrating more deeply with your counterparties, you tend to keep your own house in order better. So I think it's a good trend. But I think, probably the smart thing to do, if you can get away with it, is tell everybody you're starting a blockchain, and then write it in anything other than a blockchain, and just make it a SaaS system. And if everybody's a little creeped out by that, shamir the keys, right? So that give each administrator a keys to a root, a shamir sharing of secret sharing slice of the root keys, so that a plurality have to turn their keys to make any changes to the root. And now you've effectively got the benefits of a blockchain with no blockchain at all. And it costs you less. It's more secure. It's more scalable. That's what I would do. Does that make sense, Patrick?
Yeah. I'm interested to see basically how we could use baseline protocol, because I think, because our business logic is founded in a regulation, and the regulation is common to every actor in the supply chain, we've got a good consensus already. So
that's great.
I can imagine how you can interpret that into some form of baseline protocol. And
so let's go into that.
Nearly forget about the governance issue after that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great pivot into this conversation. I think that's not really important.
So what is the baseline protocol?
What is a baseline protocol? First of all, it's very important to know that and understand deeply that I need to say these words so that people will get this, especially blockchain people. They're expecting some magical thing. This is the most boring thing you will ever see in blockchain. It is the most boring use of a blockchain ever devised. There's nothing interesting about this. We've been doing the pattern for 40 or 50 years. It's a basic middleware pattern. And so if you're waiting for the punchline, it'll never come. I'm going to describe something that's supremely boring, which is why your CISO is going to like it.
There's no token sales, what you're saying.
There's no tokens. There's no, companies with tokens can offer things around it, but no, there's no core token to it. There's no chain. It doesn't even stipulate that you need to use necessarily Ethereum, although I'm going to argue that Ethereum is a pretty good candidate for being that ultimate bulletin board. But you could use an Arduino in your closet as the common frame of reference. I would just laugh at you, because you've perpetuated the same problem that we're trying to get out of, which is you've created a new middleware silo, right? That's the whole point of using a public blockchain for this, so that you can generate workflows under supreme compartmentalization, supreme privacy. No data goes on the thing, but you can do really cool workflow integrations, even if you discover somebody else's workflow years later that you want to integrate with, you can do that as long as you share a common repository of hashes, of proofs. So
common frame of reference. Yeah.
Common frame of reference. So if you've gone off and created your own private common frame of reference and somebody else has done the same thing, then you're back to having to decide whose machine you're going to use for your integration. And that's the problem, right? So it'd be nice if we just had, it's not the world computer. It's not the internet computer. It's the internet's, I think Ethereum could be rightly called, or in the future, the internet's boring state service for hashes and ordering. That would be, I don't know that that's good marketing for Ethereum, but I think that's ultimately, from a CIO's perspective, a pretty good job for it. It's fit for purpose. Ethereum is scalable enough for that. It's secure enough for that, as long as you do it in the right way. And that's what the standard is all about. So this is a standard. There is code associated with it, but any competent team could build this standard into production on its own without any help pretty handily, as soon as they grok the basic the design pattern. So there's nothing to buy. I don't have anything to sell you. I mean, we've got things that we can sell you to help you do it better, faster, but you don't really need them. You could do it yourself.
Do I assume it absolutely takes away the worries of GDPR and data privacy?
Yeah, as long as your databases are GDPR compliant, then you don't have to worry about a new thing having to be GDPR compliant, and then making it do sort of weird, crazy backflips of technical complexity to get it to do that when it really wasn't a good design pattern for that, right? I mean, blockchains like to spread information out. GDPR says, no, you need to keep it over here.
Because I mean, that's one of our challenges in our project is a medical project, and you can't put medical data on the blockchain because of GDPR.
Right.
So
that's right.
I mean, yeah,
that's right.
So I mean, if you do find a point to cross-reference something like I don't know if you're familiar with FHIR as an interface in medical records, if it's a kind of like a message bus as well for interfacing between hospital systems and different organizations. It's the idea of, because I am familiar with enterprise buses, and I'm just trying to see. I can see that, yeah, you could still be exchanging private data, so I can see that difference. I'd be interested to see what other differences there are.
Let's talk about that. In fact, just quickly. So let's go right into that. This is some basic data about. Actually, it's getting a little old. In fact, we're already over.
But the key here is this is open source and public domain. As John mentioned, we're not selling you a product. There's, it's simply a technique that you can leverage to help integrate your systems of record using public infrastructure. And there's a lot of people behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it started by Ernst & Young, Consensus, and Microsoft, but now, Ian, the only notable team not yet fully in is Oracle.
Yeah. We have to wait for some people to retire. Yeah, and you know who they are, John.
No, it's all good. Actually, I think that we don't want Oracle, we want NetSuite. Right.
Yeah, you know what?
We're getting traction with the traditional database teams, not the blockchain teams.
Yeah, those guys are tearing it up. They really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's
I want Sterling Commerce. I don't want IBM blockchain, and I want Sterling Commerce in there, right? Mm-hmm. I want
There's a rather large German firm that's joining actively as we speak. So
yeah, SAP is they're official and public. Yeah, SAP is in the standards team. TCS Tata is in the team now. So there's Accenture, of course, is in there, and Splunk and other companies. So let's go back to Dermot's point, which was what? Can you repeat it, Dermot?
Sorry, I was just going to say it's not part of the Linux Foundation, though. It's it's separate from that, is it?
Yes. No, you were talking. No.
It's, I was talking about FHIR. Yeah. This
is Oasis, right? So Oasis is a venerable, actually older than Linux Foundation. It's behind SGML and SAML and MQTT and AMQP and all the boring stuff, right? Standards and open source. And because Ernst & Young is an auditing company, we had to give all the code away, not under Apache, under CC0 Universal, Creative Commons, because they can't even own a license to it. If they're auditing any company that has the tech in it, they can't even own an Apache license to it. So we went full openly governed, open source under a Creative Commons license. But then Oasis's CLA covers things like patent and IP requirements that enterprises need. So we got to we've been doing this open source stuff for a few hundred years. So we're pretty good at it. So that's the organization. It's it's over 1,000 people just in the Slack channel. And it's quite vibrant. And now there are many projects happening, and they're not getting stuck in POC hell, because what we're doing makes sense and it's safe. But let's go back to what Dermot said about the middlware part. Part of the standard here is to say, hey, you can be baseline compliant when we promulgate the standard later this year or early next year, and make it official. Your implementation will test to be baseline compliant. And yeah, we want to make that a thing. We want you to be saying, send me that purchase order, make sure to baseline it. Right? It's a verb. Right? It's not a product, it's not a platform, in fact, it's a lowercase b baseline. It's not a brand. It's not even like Hyperledger Fabric, which is truly a platform. It became that. A fun fact on that, we called it Fabric because we didn't want it to become a platform, but then it turned into a platform. We're like, no, it's a fabric. It's underneath the platforms. No, didn't happen.
So Kona actually started their bottling harbor on Fabric, and they found the cost too prohibitive for all of their smaller suppliers. So they're leveraging Baseline to extend that project to 68 suppliers in North America originally, 255 worldwide following. So, and that's going into production as we speak.
Yeah, that's going to production, right? And after a few months, full production, not sort of like we're calling it production, full on real production. And so why is that? Well, because it's just based on core, good, common sense IT protocol, which is, so Dermot, to be baseline certified, you won't be allowed to use a message bus, for example, to move data from database 1 to database 2 that is like gossip, because you would be breaking GDPR. So you can use anything you like. You use NATs, you can use AMQP, you could use carrier pigeon, but it has to be compliant with the standard in order to get the moniker of baseline compliant. So that, again, it's not like we're selling you a particular message bus, but you need to do your whatever you choose, right down to emails if you're using emails, in accordance with the standard. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So far. So yeah, effectively, let me go to where would you
ask
use
a
this?
very like it goes so low, it doesn't attempt to replace the internet, does it? I'm saying that in a very very funny, just it kind of sounds like it doesn't even need it needs a network, so it need the internet.
So let's take a look at this.
The core pattern.
Yeah. What you've got is record in your database. You're going to generate a commitment, a zero knowledge proof, or a commitment that will ultimately generate that proof. You're going to sign it. You're going to send that package via carrier pigeon to your counterparty, or this could be end lateral network, so it doesn't have to be just two party. They're going to receive it. They're going to sign it. They're going to generate their side of the proof. They're going to send it back. It's going to go into this zero knowledge service, and that is something you have to add to your stack. So in the future, you can imagine SAP just comes baseline native. You just it's just got that stuff in it, or NetSuite or what have you. Today, there are vendors or VARs that will sell you stuff that you can bolt onto the side of SAP or Dynamics or what have you. Be nice to have one for NetSuite. And then effectively, you're going to receive that event. It's going to check the proof, and then it's going to call what's called a shield contract on the on whatever you've decided to make your common frame of reference, whether that's the public Ethereum blockchain, or whether it's a private instance of a blockchain, or your Arduino, right? So it's gonna generate this shield contract, and then the shield contract will call something called a verifier contract. If it returns true, then it will deposit this piece of nonsense, this proof, into a Merkle tree. Now, what that gives you is effectively a key in a key value lookup based message bus, a bulletin board, right? Key value board, right? So you can now subscribe to that. You can make sure your data is still consistent at any given time with the other party. What you've got now is a proof of consistency, which is just very, very little more than what you had before as a proof of existence, a hash, right? I don't know why didn't we get all excited about hashes? Hashes are profoundly important. I can't buy it. Why isn't a hash $1 trillion thing, right? You should be able to buy the original hash data function for $68 million in NFTs or whatever happened just the other day. That's an important piece of work, hashing, right? Didn't think it was in the 70s. True story. Mathematicians didn't think hashing was possible. So you've received it. It's instead of just a hash of some data that you can then prove was the original data, you have a proof of consistency. You know that N parties verifiably have the same data, and they can't say that they didn't get the memo. If anybody comes up and says, hey, this is what I think the real data is, everybody knows who's wrong. Right? That's it. That's the whole thing. It's as simple as that. So what you wind up, and the reason we do it under zero knowledge was two reasons. One, you can create these really cool zero knowledge circuits that can enforce workflow integrity from work step to what work step. I've got a master service agreement. I've got an RFP that had, say I'm NASA or something, I had to go through a bunch of rules to distribute the RFP. I can say verifiably that occurred. It went to all the appropriate parties identically the same, but then each party responding is completely invisible to the other parties responding, which you don't get in a Fabric channel, right? Everybody's going to know stuff is happening, even if you encrypt it. They're going to know the other parties are responding. In this, you don't even know that if you're one of 10 RFP recipients, you don't know who's bidding back. There's a complete compartmentalization. That's one of the important parts of this, right? But each party, as they go through that workflow, step to step, RFP to bid, to MSA, to master service agreement, to discount rate table, to purchase orders, and many steps in between, all the way to delivery of a product. Imagine being able to deliver through Amazon, being a competitor of Amazon, and Amazon not knowing much about you. Right now, they can look in their database and know what your flows are, who your customers are. They know everything. Wouldn't it be nice if, short of them opening up the box and seeing your logo, they can give you the ship date or the delivery date verified, but they're just dropping it on the bulletin board in a way that nobody would notice, nobody would see, nobody would be able to generate a classifier on. But you, because you're subscribed to that one piece of nonsense, are now able to say, to generate your invoice to your customer without Amazon even knowing you have a customer. That's the kind of compartmentalization you get this way. And yet you can work across all these different counterparties. All they need is to all have systems that are baseline compliant. That's my job as the TSC chair, is to make sure that 10 years from now, or maybe 20, it would be hard to do business unless you were baselined. So that's the kind of technical story. Nick, do you want to put the punchline on this from a business perspective?
Well, long story short, it allows you to maintain your systems of record, their GDPR compliance, their HIPAA compliance, what have you, and synchronize them using public infrastructure, right? So just as you need it, you pay as you go effectively. So this is very valuable when you've got business processes, obviously, that need multiple parties. There were some of the partners maybe smaller and they don't necessarily have the ability to invest up front on the kind of infrastructure that they need for a traditional EAI type system, where it's doing relatively low volumes. So you don't need to worry about real time. It's not stock trading or settlement and things of that nature. These are like net 30-day invoices, or, it needs to be there tomorrow. It doesn't need to be there in seconds. Where oftentimes there are material disputes, and those disputes could be quite costly, whether in time, money, people, or what have you. And ultimately, you want to be able to do this and maybe even integrate into these workflows at a later point in time. So it's very flexible. In a nutshell, those kinds of things make baseline a great technique to use.
And the punchline of all that is we're starting a business. In fact, I can say, I don't mind telling you that our intention is to build a company that says, if your invoices are baselined, we will buy them from you, and not for 3% for 30 days, but for 50 basis points over a T-bill or something like that, right? Because it's it's quite QED, right? If you could have a great credit score, the buyer could have a great credit score. If they didn't get the invoice, they're not going to pay it, right? So it'd be nice if you have a verified, non-tamperable act that says, we definitely have the same information. You definitely got the memo. You definitely gave me a POA, right? Proof of acknowledgement.
The 68 bottlers in Kona, just in North America, do over $900 million a year in invoices just amongst themselves. They have long-standing, well-known business relationships. They're not going away. They know their sugar suppliers, their water suppliers, their aluminum providers, very, very well. Yet they expect to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 to $50 million a year just on processing invoices by baselining their systems.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that, yeah, it allows the buyers to
manufacturing and financing.
Kona is Coke One North America, is that correct?
That's correct.
Coke One North America, yeah, it's a consortium of their bottlers that produce and distribute Coke in North America.
Yeah. ServiceNow is now baselining their systems in a different way. It's a giant company, and many others. So those are the two that have been brave enough to come out in the open, but there are more. And so that the cool thing about that is that once you are able to baseline, imagine this, right? You have the banking facility, the special purpose vehicle that is rolling up these invoices, and they're going to sell them, right? So you could, this is where tokenization still works. I can throw out an ERC20 token of these invoice that basically represents the value of the asset pool of these invoices, right? And the way I'm going to generate that is I'm going to loop through all the invoices that are being they're on offer for securitization. I'm going to loop through them. I'm going to count up their values. I'm going to add that to the state of the ERC20 in such a way that the ERC20 is kind of like a mortgage-backed security. It's rolled up. It's not telling any tales. Walmart's invoices are not now exposed to Costco, right? You don't see the invoices, but you see the rating of the tranche, and you see the a company called Centrifuge does this right now. They do a couple $1 million in tranches a month, and but all the data behind that still needs to get unpacked, because you don't want a mortgage-backed security event like we had in 2008. So a regulator still needs to be able to get in and unpack that tranche, right? With a click of a button. Well, in this case, you wouldn't. What they're doing is they're ERC20ing those, or ERC 721ing those invoices, which again, big threat surface. I don't like that. With baselining, you simply baseline it into a private database, or even better, you generate the proofs in such a way that you can get the roll up of the values and the rating and some other key attributes while never moving the actual data from the buyer and the supplier, right? Because that's what you can do with zero knowledge proofs. And by the way, we're not talking about not ZK snarks on the blockchain. Those are expensive. These are zero knowledge proofs run off chain in your baseline stack. So there's a little bit of gear there that you need to plug in, but it's fine. Yeah, and again, that means you're not beholden to a blockchain, and you're not going out in the clear with your business logic or your data, which even under ZK snarks, you have to throw your business logic out there for other people to see before you pack it up into a zero knowledge proof or into a zero. Yeah. So
it may be prudent as well to connect Dermot with Mark Hattel, Conduent. They're exploring baseline for a lot of the medical payer provider patient type use cases as well, so that medical companies can basically synchronize their systems without putting data in the open. That might be good.
Right.
Good follow-up.
Yeah, and a easy way to do that is if you go to baseline-protocol.org and you click up on the upper right into the Slack channel, you can get into our Slack channel and ping either Nick or myself, or go straight to Mark Hattel if you remember his name. And very friendly crew. So any of you guys that want to start baselining, there's lots of companies out there that'll happily take your money to help you baseline. There are, but there's a lot of people who'll just give you free advice about how to do it. And it would be great to have your teams involved in the community, helping set the standard. The standard will be into draft by the middle of summer, and then we'll go through the process of finally getting it into ISO.
And we have regular weekly office hours at this time on Wednesdays every week. So if you want to join us, that's wide open on Zoom and YouTube.
Yeah. Ian's been on a couple of
I've been on, yeah, it's great. It's good to see what other people are doing and their experiences. It's quite varied in terms of people's experience and what they're doing. And I think you definitely will get value. Certainly Dermot and Patrick, I think you guys will get, or Patrick, your CTOs, right? Your technical people, I think will get a lot of value from it. And Fiona, perhaps you guys as well. So we're top of the hour, we're actually a little bit past. So thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Nick. So we have your website, we have your details. We'll be in touch. Does anybody have any questions for Nick or John before we go?
I just one quick question. Just why not? Why is it not usable for, say share transactions or something? You were saying it not to use it in instant transactions. What was the main point? Why?
Public blockchains, private blockchains are slow by comparison to their counterparts that don't use consensus mechanisms, right? But public blockchains are super slow, always will be.
Okay.
Don't ever expect that the public blockchain is going to be your Twitch gaming backend, right? So you don't want to be using blockchains directly as your transaction processing unit. But in baselining, you're not. You're basically locking down what your traditional systems of record are already pretty good at. And now all it's adding is the ability for you to say, I know for sure that what you did and what I did was the same. And if either of us gets out of being the same, that's called debasing, and then you rebase the record.
So you're saying 24 hours kind of type of stuff, but not
oh,
minutes.
No,
minutes.
no,
minutes, even seconds.
Okay,
but,
although
but not milliseconds.
There are some in the community that are exploring L2 solutions and rollups to increase that even greater. So
yeah, that's right. So you can have everything on your private rollup or your private L2, but it's still backed by a supremely tamper resistant public system that, and that's where you want. That's what I would tell your CIOs and other folks, that might be squeamish about blockchain, and certainly public blockchain, is to say, we're not using the public blockchain for any kind of data at all. We're using the public blockchain for the one thing that it's supremely good at and stripping everything else away, right? We're using it for tamper resistance and conferring tamper resistance to our traditional systems that we already own, that now we don't have to throw out. That's usually a winning story.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Fiona, you had a question.
Yeah, so it's interesting, really, really interesting what you're doing. And I represent NSAI, which is our National Standards Authority here in Ireland, on ISO 2C307, which is blockchain and DLT. And I'm co-editor of the use cases report there. And we have a number of different use cases, including an agriculture one that essentially is using the public blockchain in a similar fashion, but as a business use case. And I'm wondering, is there a way of describing what you're very you're very sure that you're not a blockchain provider. It's integratable with a blockchain, but it's not like, I mean, some of the way that you're talking about it is kind of like commercial language and positioning, I think. And that's just how I'm hearing it, right? Because what you're doing essentially is solving through standards an interoperability problem, which all multi-party system problems essentially are. Yes. So I wonder, we could take a call, or I can go onto one of your Zoom calls. And would you like to explore the possibility of describing it as a blockchain use case for ISO, if that is
absolutely
useful
would
for your process?
For sure.
Yeah, and so it'd be great to connect offline, Fiona. Yeah. And again, if you want to just ping on Slack, or if you're not comfortable with that, any other method, and we can connect you also with Anna Iso Frank, who is in London, and she's our head of standards. She's the head of standards. Wonderful story, right? She just found us on YouTube or something. She's a CEO of a pretty legit company there, and she just got involved and said, I'm going to be the head of standards for this. And we said, okay.
She's got that startup energy that I love.
She's wonderful, wonderful human. So we can get, and then Chet Ensign and other people on the standards org at Oasis, and it'd be wonderful to compare notes on ISO 237.
Yeah, let's take that up. It's really interesting to see what you're doing, and that whole solving that problem with zero knowledge proofs and using those concepts in a non-blockchain located way is I mean, that's really, really interesting. So yeah, great to hear from you today. As you can tell, I'm on my COVID walk, so I'm going to keep moving.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous.
Thanks a million, Ian.
No, you're very welcome. I knew these guys would resonate with you, so I'm glad to connect you all. So, all right, guys,
I could probably stay on for one more second.
If I'm allowed.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, John. I think one punchline you explained to us, what you guys doing is you suggest that baseline is a verb, it's not a noun. That clicks. So my work, a lot to do with the ownership of data. So it's not a question of is a knowledge protocol that way, but it's all to do with the actual ownership. Then you also compare with, say, the traditional database like Oracle. So I learned a lot, even the short last few months when we have a number of different speakers like yourself. One thing to do then is that is, as I said earlier, the ownership of the data. In energy business, whether the data belongs to you as the consumer or indeed belongs to your grid operator. In so doing, if you move on what I just said, what I heard you said about Oracle or about database. So if I don't own the data, because I might not want to fight with the ownership with the power company, but I simply go to hang on to the schema. So that is and if that is the way to do it, so my real question to you guys then is that if I put my academic hat on, I all buy in with your standard, the way that you baseline your invoice and data flow. So when I decide a system, when I go to build my next phase of my application or decentralized applications, I heard a few times you said, John, about design pattern. Will baseline eventually come up with a set of design patterns based on the standard?
They're already there, in fact, they just can't be said to be compliant yet because we haven't promulgated the standard, but they're consistent. So we're early on that. This time next year, we'll have compliance, we'll have tests, you'll be able to be compliant. The one thing, Kraken, that you said that I'll just end on is the whole idea of data ownership is much easier to enforce in a baseline way than saying, this drives me crazy. Blockchain, you can own your data. I'm like, no, you can't. You just spread it all over hell and gone, and you have no way of getting it back, right? You don't have ownership of your data. You just think you do. And then you can say, well, this represents something that can be owned, and nobody can repudiate that. Nobody can say that you don't own that, but you didn't have to put it on a blockchain. You just put a proof on the blockchain that you own, that everybody agrees legally that you own it, which is really the important thing in the end, right? You want the proof that says nobody can say that you don't own it, that everybody who is required to say that you own it has attested to this. And then you can generate a verified credential, which again, doesn't require any blockchain at all, right? This is W3C standard. But you can anchor all that in a proof so that it's all tacked down. Nobody can mess around with the change.
Right, yeah, thanks for that, because until today, people in different industry, like the project I mentioned before, we are scratching our head to say that how do you fight for the data ownership? A real example is some of my colleagues in the Netherlands. We all look at what, say, American, do with some of my colleagues down in Texas, what have you, or even in Manhattan to do with transactive energy. But the example in Netherlands then is that the people is reluctant to go into the renewable energy because then the data they thought they have is actually claimed by the power company, the grid operator. So that is one issue. We thought that we might look into the help with data scientists, that they said that the data set is the ownership. So when you look into your baseline, would I be right to say that that really is not the case? It's the fact that you use a blockchain, but it's not a blockchain as such. So you set a standard. So I look forward for your design pattern coming on, and I think you don't need any more sales pitch. We are in it.
Right on. Well, it's great to see you all, and it'd be great to have your engineers and your standards people, involved in the community. Really, and this is Ian. This is the story for Oracle as well. Mm-hmm. You guys want to be at the table defining this standard. You really do.
Yeah, we're behind. We are.
There's still time. All right, everybody. In fact, I'm late for the standards meeting, so I better run.
That's what I thought.
Thanks, everyone.
John, Nick, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for
have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.